Welcome to the Think Christian podcast, where we talk about faith and pop culture, because there's no such thing as secular. I'm Josh Larsen, your host and senior producer over at thinkchristian.net. So it turns out that musical artists other than Taylor Swift and Beyonce were hard at work in 2023. As much as we love the two of them here at TC, we're going to spend some time highlighting different musicians in this Best Music of 2023 episode. The first of three shows dedicated to celebrating the best pop culture of last year. Aarik Danielsen, Kathryn Freeman, and Olcese are going to be joining me for that conversation. But first, let's get to a pick from a listener. Josh Baylog, a regular contributor to these Best of the Year shows, he called out a specific song from 2023, the Arcadian Wild's Two Kinds. Thanks for that pick there, Josh. Always good to hear from you. Okay, let's get to some more music and bring on Aarik, Kathryn, and Abby. I have a great group here with me to talk Best Music of 2023. Aarik Danielsen, Kathryn Freeman, Olcese. Welcome to all three of you. Quickly at the top here, I thought it might be fun to learn something about each of you musically speaking by asking for a little peek at those year-end listening stats we get around now. Maybe it's Spotify Wrapped, maybe Apple Music Replay. There might be others. Maybe you guys didn't do this and you'll just have to, do your own stat keeping and report. But let me know who was the top 2023 artist for each of you. So the artist basically you listen to the most according to whatever streaming platform. I'll just say right now, mine was Wilco. A little bit of a surprise to me, even though I do love Wilco. But I then realized, we talked fairly recently about their album Cousin, and I did have it quite a bit on repeat for that conversation here on the podcast. So it was Wilco for me. Who wants to go next with their top 2023 artist? Anyone know that off the top of their head, which one it was?
Okay, so mine is fairly obvious if you know me. Taylor Swift and Beyonce, according to Spotify Wrapped. And then I listen to Nicholas Britell quite a bit. I love his soundtracking. So when I'm writing and doing schoolwork, Succession, and really If Beale Street Could Talk are my two favorite sort of soundtracks to listen to when I'm working.
That Beale Street score is amazing. Yeah, it's nice to have kind of movie scores in the mix there. All right, Aarik, did you have a surprising or a familiar top artist?
I did have a surprising, although the artist is very familiar. I am slowly working my way chronologically through Bob Dylan's discography. I am not a major Dylan head, but I wanted to fill in the gaps this year. So I've made it all the way through the 80s, which those 80s albums are rough, but I know the 90s are coming and they're going to be better. So Dylan was my number one. The artist that I'm going to be talking about more in a moment was my number two, and they were the little video that I got on my Spotify Wrapped. I'm pretty positive Bob Dylan did no Spotify Wrapped videos for anyone this year, so I can't imagine what that would have been like.
Probably not, but I love that as a project. Very cool. How about you, Abby?
So I kind of abandoned Spotify a couple of years ago and used Tidal, which doesn't do a great job of giving you a fun little statistic video at the end. But I do know I listen to a lot of Beyonce. I listen to a lot of Kate Bush. And I also listen to the Barbie soundtrack a lot. Particularly The Man I Am, the Sam Smith track off that album, which I think is just hilarious and is just, it's a ray of goofy sunshine every time I hear it. That and I'm Just Ken.
Nice, of course.
I love.
All right, well, let's get to our picks for our favorite albums of the year. We'll stick with you, Abby, here. You wanted to discuss Sufjan Stevens' Javelin. And according to my Apple Music Replay report, this was, or at least Sufjan was my 14th most listened to artist for me. So in the mix there. And I do concur, however, that Javelin, one of the music highlights of the year. What did you love about this album?
So first of all, I kind of need to describe this. I want to put up a warning up front that I wouldn't recommend listening to it end to end the way that I did this morning in prepping for this, just because it is such an emotionally intense album. I described it to a friend as kind of like the Ark of the Covenant. You can't look at it directly and you can only experience it in pieces.
Okay.
It's one of the things that I really like about Sufjan Stevens as an artist, maybe the thing that I like the most, is his ability to combine work that is intensely personal with sentiment that feels really universal. And I think that Javelin is it's excellent. It's excellent at encapsulating, if you've followed his posts in his life at all recently, the pain that he's clearly going through with the loss of his partner and the physical illness that he's been suffering recently. That stuff is all there, but it's combined with this sense of heartbreak and world weariness and relational difficulty that I think is such, like, it really spoke to me in terms of just being a really good illustration of how it feels to be a person right now and how it feels to be a person of faith right
Mm.
now in a time of just immense doubt and pain, and the world being kind of a difficult place. Is just like, how do we love each other well? How do we live with each other well? And how do we care for ourselves and each other in a time that is just so full of reckoning?
Mm. Yeah, I think that is a good word of caution. This is an album that'll ring you out, so get ready for it if you're gonna sit with it in its entirety. We did write an article, or we posted an article about this album as well at thinkchristian.net. Joel Mayward wrote this, and he paid particular attention to the song "Everything That Rises." Joel wrote this about that song. When Sufjan sings, "Everything that rises must converge, everything that rises in a word," I hear a double meaning. There is a momentary word, as well as the eternal capital W word, who became flesh and dwelt among us. Indeed, Stephen's song contains a direct cry to this word, "Jesus, lift me up to a higher plane." So that was Joel Mayward. And I'd love to hear, Aarik, what you made of this song, or just Javelin in general.
Yeah, I think that is absolutely one of my favorite tracks on the album. And I think I'm kind of in this weird place with Sufjan Stevens where I think a lot of folks who have inhabited church circles that are around my age, he's kind of a figurehead, kind of an icon. And I've always felt like I maintain a little bit more of a respectful distance with Sufjan, that I really appreciate his work, but have never been quite as intensely, wrapped up in it. And I think some of it for me is just like, and there are particular albums of his I love, especially, I'm listening to his Christmas stuff all month this month.
Sure.
But I don't know if it's some of the imagery in the lyrics or even with the way like his vocals get recorded sometimes, but I feel like there is kind of a distance sometimes with his work. And I think this one, just the way that, knowing the circumstances, the personal nature of the lyrics, and I think the way the music is mixed and recorded, it does clearly feel like his most personal record to me. And songs like "Everything That Rises" or even "Goodbye Evergreen," that is such a just stunner of an opener. The way that he
Yeah.
invites the backing vocals, the way they're recorded on this record, it's like he's inviting everyone into these painful moments with him. It's almost like there's this kind of cloud of witnesses around him. And I think just that give and take and that personal nature, it's absolutely, I think, one of the best things he's ever done.
So I expected a Jesus reference on a Sufjan Stevens album, but not necessarily from Cleo Sol. Kathryn, this your pick is Gold, the 2023 album from Cleo Sol. Now, she was new to me, I should say, so maybe no one else was surprised, but I was basically going off the description of Gold, her album, in Apple Music, and based on that, I thought, I might get something vaguely spiritual. Maybe this is what they described the album as: a spiritual offering from the British singer who has become a voice of big picture optimism and reassurance in the R&B and soul genre space. So I've got that in the back of my head, hit play, and then I'm listening, a track like Reason comes on, Kathryn, and suddenly I hear in this just beautifully chill, almost laconic voice that she has, "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me." So what do we have here, Kathryn? Tell us a little bit about Cleo Sol and what you liked about Gold.
Yeah, so she's an artist I discovered, I think, through Spotify, actually, and those playlists that they make based on other things that you listen to. And so my understanding, she was new to me this year too. She is married to a British producer called Inflow, who has done a lot of work with Little Sims and Tiny Timpa. And his sort of influences, and I would say both, they do point to a lot of like gospel and R&B sort of neo soul influences. I think Inflow, my understanding is, they both kind of grew up in sort of the sort of maybe like Pentecostal-esque church in the UK. But it's not, like they're not obviously making, I don't think that she would describe herself as like a Christian artist. She would definitely say she's R&B and soul. And what I loved about the album is just kind of the things that Abby said about Sufjan, of like, it just feels like this year, like this was a really tough year for me, like personally. My father passed away, and the album opens up, There Will Be No More Crying, and her sort of voice of like, that it's both reassuring and kind of, I hear it as kind of like pleading for the like, that there will be no more crying. And that sort of like reminder, there are like, of course, themes of like love, which are, ubiquitous in R&B and soul, but just that idea of like, I feel like this moment in time that we're living in, where it just feels like maybe for a lot of people that you're just like crushed on all sides, and this sort of like, both that the ways in which like love endures and perseveres in the midst of trying circumstances, but I think also too in the ways in which like this is ultimately not our home, and like that sort of reminder of that there is a place where there is no like crying. And so yeah, I just like loved her voice, and maybe it just also too just like really, I think, spoke to the moment for my life, and just feels like the world that we're in. That song, There Will Be No More Crying, I think, if you're having like a bad day, or it's like a bad news day, it's just a good reminder of like where our hope ultimately lies. And yeah, that you can, that is sort of an anchor in the midst of like a storm. And so I think even just like reason, right? Like I can do all things through Christ on days where it's just like, I want to give up, but I can keep going. And so, yeah, I just, that sort of comes across to me in a lot of the songs on Gold, which was part of like a double album that she released. I think Heaven was the first one that came out maybe a month before, which I didn't listen to as much. But I think that there's sort of this theme across these two albums in terms of like really what is eternal and what matters and what's going to last.
Yeah, listening to Gold, it does feel like a warm embrace, but not in a cheaply sentimental or surface way. And I think you zeroed in on why, Kathryn, there, when you said pleading is the tone given to that phrase, there'll be no more crying, because sometimes that can feel like a platitude when, that verse may be read in church and people are receiving it differently. But there might be days where it's like, yeah, sure, but what good does that do me now, right? But it's that element of pleading in the phrase that you hear on this music, as you say, that I think gives it an extra authenticity and a deeper comfort. Because, yeah, I put this on, since you told us it would be your pick, I've listened to it a couple times, and each time I kind of felt myself like the tension just going a little bit away as the music was playing in a way that felt really authentic. So Aarik, I think you had mentioned that Cleo Sol was somewhat new to you as well.
Yeah, I feel like, let me do this publicly. Kathryn, I owe you a big thank you for putting this on my radar, because I had somehow missed it, and I absolutely love this record. From a musical standpoint, her voice is great. I love how the arrangements are, if you listen to them, they are actually kind of busy. Like the bass is doing a lot in this music, but it feels like there's a lot of space in the sound, and it's a really cool kind of contrast. I really loved Reason that you mentioned. Things Will Get Better is like one of the cooler songs I feel like I've heard in a while. And I really love the way that she reframes, like we hear in a lot of songs talk about like how we approach God. And that song starts with the idea of like, what if God called you at 5 a.m.? Like, would you get up and would you get on your knees and would you pray? Kind of like, what about how God approaches us? And what if he wakes you up in the middle of the night? And I just thought that was such a cool way of reframing kind of the way that we interact with prayer and interact with God. So yeah, I'm going to be going back absolutely and listening to this record from time to time, because I think it's really cool.
What'd you make of this one, Abby?
Yeah, I agree. This was a new to me as well, and it was, yeah. If Javelin is this like cathartic cry, I feel like Gold is the weighted blanket that you get after, where it's just pure like reassurance and comfort and an acknowledgement that yes, things are hard, but that things can get better, that you can do all things through Christ who strengthens you. And but yeah, like not in a platitudinal way, and like almost like a word from a friend or a pastor or like somebody who knows you and loves you is how I felt listening to this.
A weighted musical blanket. I love that.
So yeah, that was good.
All right, so that leaves us with your pick, Aarik, and it's something of a double album too. Another artist very busy putting out two albums in 1 year. This comes from The National, both of these. Tell us what was going on here, because maybe I'm wrong in this, but usually there's big gaps between national albums, or fairly significant ones. But to have
Yeah.
2 in 1 year seems unusual, at least.
It is, and I wish I knew the backstory a little bit better. I feel like I don't have the history down, but yeah, first 2 pages of Frankenstein in the spring, and then Laugh Track in the fall. I think, obviously from kind of similar sessions, and there are similar guest artists like Phoebe Bridgers is on both records, whereas Sufjan and a minor singer-songwriter named Taylor Swift on one of the others. But yeah, it is interesting, and it's been interesting too to see how national fans have reacted, because I think, a lot of people have done the whole like, well, if we put together, songs from these two albums, we would have one perfect album instead of two that are maybe a little messier. I've seen some, I think they're calling it Frankenstein laughs, some articles where people are like trying to piece together their perfect record.
Sure.
I have been firmly in the camp of first 2 pages of Frankenstein being my favorite of the two. And yet, Laugh Track, I have been playing kind of over and over for the last week or two. So we'll see. Maybe my attitude will shift over the long haul. But I think the first one is the best one of the two.
Okay. Yeah, I've listened to them both, obviously, and I haven't fallen on one side or the other, but have enjoyed both quite a bit. I just, Matt Berninger, lead singer, has got to have one of the most distinctive voices. It's like this burly whisper that it almost feels like a put on. But if you listen to a whole album, it's like, no, this is how this guy sings, and it's kind of amazing. Was there a standout track from either album that you wanted to highlight? Maybe a place people could start if they're feeling a little overwhelmed by facing two albums?
Sure. I think for me, the song that I keep going back to, and I don't know if it's indicative or not, but from first 2 pages of Frankenstein is the second track called Eucalyptus. And it's one I made a joke, I think, on social media at some point this year that my new favorite genre of music is just Matt Berninger asking questions out loud. Because the song is a lot of like, the verses are all, what about this? What if I did this? But it's kind of this just him sifting essentially like, what in my life at this point do I want to keep and hang on to, and what do I need to let go of? And for me, The National, I echo so much of what both Abby and Kathryn have said about their picks. Like, I often tell people The National kind of sound like the inside of my brain. And I feel like, as someone who is pretty anxious most of the time, that anxiety works both inside out and outside in, right? Where it sometimes starts with me, but often it also is coming in from what's going on in the world. And these guys just, for me, have always felt like oddly consoling in the way that they kind of lament and kind of sift through these things and try to figure out their own anxieties over the years. And so for me, Eucalyptus, there are standout tracks across both records, but that's one I've come back to a lot, because I feel myself kind of in the middle of those questions with him, asking, okay, the world is a hard place. I'm experiencing hard things. What's worth keeping and what's worth discarding for the sake of kind of living well and being a good neighbor. So yeah, that's the song that I kind of keep coming back to.
Now, our Dad Rock correspondent, Sarah Welch Larsen, she's not here to weigh in. She's going to be part of our Best of TV 2023 episode. But maybe Abby, maybe Kathryn, you can do your best to fill in. Were you able, Kathryn, to give either of these albums a listen?
So I listened to the first 2 pages of Frankenstein, and I think, I'm just going to be honest, because of Taylor Swift, I feel like Folklore and Evermore, her collaborations with Aaron Dessner is kind of what put him on my radar. I just kind of loved the work that they did together in terms of like songwriting. And so have kind of been trying to like go back and like listen to more of The National, but I didn't realize that they had released a second album this year. But first 2 pages of Frankenstein, I like loved. And the first one, because I think Taylor does her best work in terms of like songwriting with Aaron Dessner, but I love that song Eucalyptus. I was actually listening to it yesterday and I just was like struck, I think for the same reasons with Cleo Sol, like the kind of questioning and like just being okay. I think too, as someone, I guess, that has struggled with anxiety this last year, one of the things that's like helped me the most is like not trying to rush my way out of it. It just like that increases the anxiety.
Yeah.
And so what I loved about the song Eucalyptus is just the encouragement to just like sit in intention and just like ask these questions. Like it's okay to just like sit and figure out like, what do I want to take? What do I want to leave? And like it just to me didn't feel rushed. And like that like reminder that it's okay to like be in a kind of questioning place and not like rush yourself to like some sort of certainty, or like if you're in a season of solitude or whatever, like that you don't have to like rush from that season to like this next better greater thing. And so I did really love. I'm like new to dad rock. I probably need to like I feel like Wilco is like the dad rock. I don't know. So I feel like maybe I should get into that next. But I enjoy this album a lot. It's is outside of my normal genre. I really love the songwriting.
Yeah, you can, to your point, I feel like a lot of the music from the National, you can just sit in. It kind of washes over you. It's not in a hurry to get to a particular place. They kind of begin before you realize they're beginning, and sometimes they end before you realize they've ended in a good way. It's just a very atmospheric experience. Where are you at, Abby, with the National?
Yeah, I mean, I've loved the National since Boxer, I think, which is I think kind of their breakout album. Like that was the one where they were like, "This is the best record of the year," and I was like, "I've never heard of this band," and then like quickly got into the whole thing. But the tracks that really stuck out to me on this album were like we've talked a little bit about like sitting in questions and like what do I want to keep and what do I want to get rid of. I think the things that struck me about this album were the things that Matt Berninger as a singer is keeping, like is choosing to keep. So songs like New Order T-shirt, which is just so vivid and wistful and a little bit sad, but also just like paints this very strong picture of a relationship. Like you can see the rooms, you can see the stuff that people are wearing, you can get a sense of what it's like to be in that place with those people. And then also, like, there's dad rock in that there's rock for dads, and then there's dad rock in that there is songs about being a dad. And I think Weird Goodbyes was that for me, where like he's very clearly talking about wanting to be present with his family and recognize all the changes that are happening and to be present, like while he's bathing his kids, while he's driving in the car, while he's grieving something. And I like, as somebody who like my dad had a health scare recently in the last month. And so, questions of being present and being aware of the people that you love and that you want to keep close for as long as you possibly can was really resonant with me, and kind of the odd way that it feels when there's risk of losing a person or being reminded of like the finite time that we have together and how to make the most of it is stuff that really hit hard for me for both those records.
Well, Erica, I'll give you a final word since there were two albums to discuss here. Is there anything we missed or didn't touch on you wanted to mention about either of these?
I don't think so. I should say, just as like, I'm not trying to make this into some sort of self-plug, but I wrote a poem that was published this year about the National, and basically going off of the meme language of there are two wolves inside of you. And I just said both of my wolves are Matt Berninger. I appreciate so much. It really touches my heart, both the things that Abby and Kathryn said. And I think as someone, clearly I am a dad and am kind of going through, kind of a seminal stage in my own son's life. And I think like they both identified really well, like, there are particular anxieties that go along with that. There are particular fears. There are things that you really want to make happen for yourself, to better yourself and also for your family. And it feels hard to manifest those things in the world that we live in. And so like I said, it's consolation to me. It's knowing that I'm not alone. It's, it's a sort of psalm language that, says like, hey, someone else has felt this too. And I just am grateful for that always when I hear their stuff. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Is that poem, did you say, can we find it somewhere? Can we link to it?
I can send you a link. It's a little bit difficult to find. It's in a print journal, and it's in the middle of a website. This great journal called Fevers of the Mind. They do a lot of music-based issues. There's a swear in it, but I'm just quoting the National. It's a National lyric. So,
well,
just be warned.
Thank you for that warning.
I, as a dad, I have to, make sure people know. So, yeah.
There you go. Well, thank you to all three of you. This was some really lovely music you brought, and I like how it's kind of come and work together. All of this seems to be, music that's raw in some ways, in many ways, but consoling maybe ultimately as well. So I love that. Let's take a quick minute here, though, before we go. We want to share some other pop culture picks from 2023. All three of you watch a lot of stuff as well. So I would love to hear about a movie or a TV show that that was a highlight for each of you last year. Abby, what do you got for us?
Yeah. I actually ended up watching a lot of TV this year just because I was watching so many movies that watching stuff for fun became TV watching most of the time.
Okay.
And I was super drawn to and impressed by the limited series Mrs. Davis on Peacock. It is just like there's all kinds of interesting stuff about faith and free will in it, but it's also just creatively just this gonzo series where like wild stuff happens, and it has a very like fun and playful and childlike sense of what is possible in narrative storytelling that I really hadn't engaged with, I think, since I was like in middle school, like a very young person. And so it was really exciting and refreshing to see that given a budget and a place to live. It's one of those things that you can't quite believe exists, and it was a delight.
Nice. So that's Mrs. Davis.
Mm-hmm.
All right, great. How about you, Eric?
I'm curious to see what face Abby's going to make about this because she's interviewed this person before. But this is the year that I really dove deep into what I will call the Joe Pera-verse, the Joe Pera universe, the comic. I binge watched the series. The series is a couple years old now. It's not being made anymore. But I binge watched his series. Joe Pera Talks with You on Max this year, and then he released a stand-up special called Slow and Steady. I don't know how to describe Joe Pera to you if you don't know who he is. He is like an old man in a young man's body who does just like plays with that persona so beautifully in his show and in his stand-up. And there's just this like subversive Midwestern kindness to his work that I just absolutely love. And that was kind of my weighted blanket this year. I mean, the guy literally does podcasts about talking you to sleep because he's so slow and quiet and gentle. And he plays with that persona a little bit in his stand-up special to the point of like saying some bawdier things, but then has to come back and basically like explain it away like he had too much caffeine or something. Like there's no way he could have been like that without, some outside agent. So anyway, Joe Pera has been a great balm to me this year, and I'm thankful for him. So,
and I just want to jump in and say that I saw Joe Pera on, I think that tour, it was delightful. He was described by Dan Licata, his opener and frequent collaborator, as your neurodivergent king, which I thought was delightful and very accurate. And I think early on in the show, and I don't know if this is in the special or not, but I thought it was great that he mentioned like maybe you came because you wanted to see what it was like to see Rick Steves do stand up, and I was like, that's it. That's the descriptor.
Yep. He absolutely mentions that. Yeah.
That leaves you, Kathryn. Do you have a TV or a movie pick for us?
Yes. So this is kind of cheating. So my movie pick would be The Renaissance. I think personally, I went and saw on tour, and it just, as someone who has had a hard year, and the just sort of unfiltered like joy, the excellence. I think that like the tour is that for her. She talks a lot about like that doing this tour for her, and she doesn't have to prove herself to anyone. And I think that like came through. So I definitely would pick, that would be my like cheat. And then my like real thing is Apple TV's Slow Horses. I didn't watch a lot of TV this year, but I love like British Spy, and it's just perfect. Like Gary Oldman is just perfect. Like he's grumpy, he's clearly smells bad. You can tell that through the TV. And it's like funny that everyone else in the series is always running and he walks everywhere, like very just like a self-possessed man. And it's about sort of where they send MI5 agents that mess up. They go to this house, they call it Slow House. But somehow they always find themselves in the middle of some big spy hullabaloo. But it's great character work, and it's super interesting and riveting, and I really enjoy this show.
Well, that's good to hear, because I think we're going to have a TC post fairly soon here on that series. Robert Hubbard was so hoping to write something for us. So yeah. Well, thank you again to all three of you. Good to be able to talk together, and look forward to doing a lot more of it in 2024.
Yeah. Happy New Year, guys.
Happy New Year.
We're just getting started with these best of 2023 episodes of the podcast. Next up, we'll be talking TV, and then after that, we'll move on to film. We'd still love to hear some of your picks for the best of the year in all of these categories. You can always email us at tcpodcast@thinkchristian.net. On social media, look for us on Facebook and Twitter/X. We're at Think Christian. And if you want to make sure never to miss one of our articles that we publish regularly, a couple each week, you can subscribe to receive our emails at thinkchristian.net/subscribe. Now, for our YouTube viewers, you missed out on a lot of the music we talked about on this show. We're going to be publishing a full list of all our picks for the episode, listeners' picks as well, some others that were submitted via email. And you can find that at thinkchristian.net. We'll also link to that list in the show notes for this episode. The Think Christian podcast is a listener-supported production of Reframe Ministries, a family of programs designed to help you see your whole life reframed by God's gospel story. Reframe's audio engineer and post-production supervisor is John Reeder, and Reframe's co-director overseeing content strategy, that's Robin Baselin. I'm Josh Larsen. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back in about a week or so to celebrate the best TV of 2023 as we continue to consider how another corner of our pop culture fandom connects with our faith.